Good morning, good to see you. It's still a bit chilly in here, apologise for that. Are you okay? Yeah? Okay. If you need to stand up and run around, that's fine too. All right. If you have your Bibles there, open them up to Acts chapter 10, verse 9 to 23. It's also in the Notes app on our app, if you want to check that out. So Acts chapter 10, verse 9 to 23. And this morning I'm talking about something happened part 2. Something happened part 1 was a few weeks ago. Picking it up. We're kind of following on a bit of a theme here because I figured if I made everyone nervous last week talking about the need to interpret the Bible through Jesus, I may as well go for gold this week and talk about the idea that our particular beliefs do not necessarily set God's boundaries, right? So our particular beliefs, they do not necessarily set God's boundaries. And that from time to time, we're going to come across things that actually seem to conflict with the way we see things and what we believe. And we have a choice in those moments about what to do with that. We can have this kind of knee-jerk, reflexive reaction to it and go, no, I'm not having a bar of that. Or we can actually take a more thoughtful approach because there may be actually something in that we need to explore. So I want to look more at this. And there are two reasons I want to keep talking about this. If I seem to be talking about it a lot, there are two reasons I seem to be talking about this. One is because change is one of the three certainties in life, okay? Death, taxes, and change. It is a constant, right? Change is just a constant. It's with us all the time. Whether we know it or not, it's with us all the time. Our bodies are constantly changing. Our cells are regenerating. We're constantly being renewed. That's happening at different rates for different parts of our body, but it's happening all the time. There's this renewal going on all the time. We go through seasons or stages in life where things change for us too. And, we are not friends with the people we used to be friends with anymore. We're not working in the same place. We go through all of this type of stuff. Our children grow up, we go to different schools, etc., etc., etc. We also mature in our thinking. Our thinking changes over time as well, at least it should. I can guarantee that most of us here don't think about things and don't see the world in the same way we did when we were 10 years old, yeah? If you do, that would be considered problematic, all right? Because we should have matured in the way we think about things. In fact, Paul even talks about this, doesn't he? He says, when I was a child, I reasoned like a child, I thought like a child, but now I'm grown up, I've put those childish ways behind me. There comes a point in time where we have to start putting ways of seeing things and understanding things behind us as we grow and develop and deepen in our understanding of things. I mean, I grew up literally, and I won't tell you what age I discovered that these things were not true because that's humiliating. But I used to believe that if you ate cheese before going to bed, you would have nightmares. Anyone else told that? Yeah. If you ate uncooked pasta, you'd get appendicitis. And if you swallowed chewing gum, it would get tangled around your heart. Now, I was like 42 when I realised that. These are things my mother taught me when I was a child, and it wasn't until later that I discovered that these things were not true, okay? So change is not only normal and good, sometimes it's absolutely necessary. And that applies to our faith as well, the things that we believe. People, we tend to get a little bit squeamish when we talk about changing our faith and changing our beliefs. But the truth is we kind of do that all the time too. I can again guarantee that the things you think and the things you believe, they've moved on from the things you've believed at first. They've morphed and they've changed in some way. Some things you maybe don't believe anymore. Some things you may understand in a different way. Some things are deeper convictions. But we've all changed. That's happened. And I think the capacity and willingness for us to be able to rethink the way we see things and to rethink what we believe is absolutely critical, an essential part of being a disciple, a follower of Jesus, particularly in this day and age when there seems to be so much going on all the time that we need to navigate. We forget that we call ourselves Christian, and Christianity seems to often posit itself as kind of like a static position, a point at which we arrive based on some beliefs that we've come to and some steps that we've taken, and now we sit here. But we're actually not. We're called followers of Jesus, and following Jesus is actually a dynamic process. It's something that is ongoing and changing all the way. And we have to be given permission and equipped to think faithfully and critically about things rather than just not knowing what to do about it when we confront them or having this knee-jerk reaction against them. Because if we don't, this is the thing I want us to understand, if we don't navigate these things when something happens well, we may miss out on something that God is actually trying to lead us into for a very good reason. So it behoves us to do this as well as we can. So we're going to look at this story in Acts chapter 10 and Peter's experience of it, right? Now there's a context to this story, and I'm just going to explain the lead up to the bit that I'm going to read. Peter, he's moved on from Jerusalem and he's moved up north a little bit. He's staying in a place called Joppa. But there is this Roman centurion in Caesarea called Cornelius. Now, he's a Roman and he's a centurion. He's in the army. He's part of the occupation forces. And he's an Italian. He's part of the Italian regiment that we're told. But we're also told about him that he is what they called a God-fearer. That is, a Gentile who believed in the God of the Jews, in Yahweh, and he would pray to Yahweh, and he would also do a lot of other good things like give money to the poor and stuff like that. The issue here is that even though Cornelius was kind of on board with what the Jews believed, he couldn't be a Jew. He was a Gentile. He couldn't go to synagogue with them. He wasn't welcome in the temple. He was not considered one of them. He was still considered an outsider. And yet, for all intents and purposes, he was very much one of them. Now, I was reading that and I thought, there's a whole sermon in that, about how there are people that belong to God who are not part of our organised structures, and I realise that I've already made people nervous this morning in saying that, but there are people who follow Jesus that don't necessarily go to church, right? You understand that? And there are people in church that don't necessarily follow Jesus. You know that too, don't you, right? So, in a way, this is kind of a false security sometimes in thinking, oh, I go to church. It's not really the point. The point is, are you following Jesus? Right. So anyway, so Cornelius is this type of guy, and he's respected by the Jews. And then, so God sends an angel to him, as, that happens, right? God sends an angel to him and says, Cornelius, God is pleased with you. Your prayers have come up. He's noticed all the good stuff you've been doing for the poor. I want you to send to this house in Joppa for a man called Peter and bring him to you because he's got some stuff that he needs to explain to you. So that's where this story picks up. In verse 9, so Peter and the entourage are on the way. About noon the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat. And while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven opened and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals, as well as reptiles and birds. Then a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." Now, the first thing I want us to understand is this, that we all have a way of seeing the world. What is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, what is acceptable, what is not, what it looks like to love, what it looks like to work, to parent, to handle money, recreate, deal with conflict, look after yourself. We all have a way of seeing that. We've all learned that, inherited, been taught, picked up these ways as we've grown up. And that includes our faith. Our faith is a composite of our beliefs and understandings about God that we have, again, learned, been taught, imbibed, conclusions we've come to in all sorts of ways. It's just that begins to form our faith. But what we need to remember is that our way of seeing things is not the way of seeing things. Do you know what I mean by that? Our way of seeing things is not the way to seeing things. Although sometimes, in our less best moments, that's exactly how we think about things, isn't it? We think our way of seeing things is like the only way to see it. Anyone? Yeah? Sometimes we think, oh, it's as plain as the nose on your face that it's this. Well, no, that's your perspective. That's your particular understanding. And I'm not talking about objective truth, like, is this a podium, right? There's no ambiguity around that one, is there? Okay? I'm talking about other things where we think, look, this is definitely the way things are. And people go, well, I actually disagree with that. So our way of seeing things is not necessarily the way. We don't have a lock on truth and reality. And most of the time it takes something to happen to help us see that. And Peter was about to undergo a major challenge to the way he saw things, a major shift in his thinking and his beliefs. And it wasn't something that he was looking for, and it's not something that he was actually expecting. He was just popping up on the roof to have a quick pray and to wait for lunch. And while he's up on the roof having a pray and waiting for lunch, he has a vision. And in that vision, you heard it said, he sees a sheet being lowered from heaven by the corners, and it's filled with all sorts of animals, including the unclean animals, the things that a good Jewish boy would have been prohibited to touch, much less eat. And then contrary to everything that he believes and everything that he is taught, he is told to get up and to kill and to eat it all. Now, it's unlikely that you and I will ever have that sort of something happen to us, although good for you if you end up having those type of visions. But for most of us, we're not going to have that type of vision, right? That's how these interruptions are not going to come to us necessarily like that. But just like Peter, stuff can break into our world when we aren't expecting it, when we aren't looking for it, and confront our thinking and our beliefs. Now, sometimes it can be an internal thing. We hear something, we read something, we see something that actually gets our cogs turning, and we start to rethink things, and we start to get challenged on stuff. Sometimes it can be external. External things can happen that really are quite jarring to us. Something happens to us, or there's been a big thing lately with a lot of people in churches struggling with their trust in institutional churches and leadership because of all the scandals that have happened with churches, right? And it's not just making people rethink church, it's making a lot of people rethink Christianity as well. So there can be these external things. The problem is we don't always see these things as opportunities. Sometimes we just see these things as problems and painful things that we really want to avoid, or they've let us down in some way. But we often don't see them as opportunities to think about what might be going on here and what we might be able to learn through this. And that's what I want to talk about today. It'd be great if every time God wanted to get our attention, he did it in a way that was unambiguously God. You know what I mean by that? Like an angel I mean, that probably wouldn't be cool. It would be a little scary. But you know, like that God did something that was unambiguously God, so we could go, okay, that was God, therefore, right, whatever then follows, I need to actually take notice of that. But just because something is not in a vision or a voice from heaven doesn't mean that God is not in it, and it doesn't mean that God can't use it. Now, it doesn't automatically mean that he is in it either. That's why for us, we have to do the long, sometimes painful work of discerning what's going on. And herein lies some of the problem for us. A lot of us don't want to do that. A lot of us want everything kind of sort of dished up, you know, served up, packaged and presented to us in a way that we can just sort of digest. But to be honest, following Jesus requires us sometimes to do the hard work of really working through stuff and trying to discern what's what. And that's not always an easy thing to do. So there are times when something will happen that will challenge the way we see things. But the thing with that is, we almost always resist any challenge to change. Has anyone noticed that? We almost resist any challenge to change. There's a cartoon I saw a while ago with two frames in it, and on the first frame, a big crowd of people and a guy standing up in front of a crowd saying, "Who wants change?" And every hand in the room was up. And in the second frame, it was, "Who wants to change?" And there was not one hand up. And I thought, and there it is. We all want change, but how many of us want to change? The reality is that's the only way change actually comes about, is if we actually change. So, many of us, we fear change. We don't like it because we don't know where it's going, and we struggle with the cost and the process, and that's all completely legit. And so when we get challenged by things that actually confront or are kind of right angles to the way we see things and what we believe, you know, often we have that fight, flight, freeze response, We have this kind of really highly heightened emotional response to it rather than a thoughtful response to it. I mean, look at what Peter did when he was told to do something that was contrary to what he believed, right? Verse 14. Get up, Peter, kill and eat, right? Verse 14. Surely not, Lord, Peter replied. I've never eaten anything impure and unclean. The voice spoke to him a second time. Don't call anything impure that God has made unclean. Then it goes on to say, this happened 3 times. And then the sheet was taken back to heaven. It took 3 times for Peter to relent. It took 3 times for Peter to go, okay, maybe I need to go with this. And he knew that it was God, or at least a messenger from God, because he's like, surely not Lord, right? So he knows this is coming from God, a messenger from God, and yet 3 times he pushes back on it. No. Why? Because this is completely contrary to what I believe. How much more resistant are we going to be if we are not convinced that something is from God? Or how much more resistant are we going to be if we think something is not from God at all? Which is what most of us think when something comes along that challenges what we already believe about God. But here's the fun fact about this particular episode, right? Peter was asked to do something that went against what he believed about God by God. Are you with me? I'll get the photo over here. Okay. Peter was asked to do something that went against what he believed about God by God. Think about that for a second. I get it, right? Change is hard. We like the familiar, safe world we've created for ourselves and it works for us. But what if God is wanting to focus us out of our safe little worlds into the much bigger world that he is actually creating? What if that's the point behind all of this? Way back in Acts chapter 1 verse 8, Peter was one of the guys that was standing in front of Jesus just before he was about to go back to the Father. And Jesus says to them in Acts chapter 1:8, you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. Now this was a case of either not listening or not reading the fine print, because they're all like, yeah, cool, like filled with the Holy Spirit, filled with power, be your witnesses, absolutely, totally get it. The problem is, at least one of those destinations was off limits to them. Jesus goes out in concentric circles from Jerusalem and Judea to Samaria to the utmost parts of the earth. So it's Jerusalem and Judea, yeah, they're our people. We're cool, of course we're going to go to them. Samaria, not so much, but okay, we've been there with Jesus, so that's fine too. But then he goes out another circle, the utmost ends of the earth. And who lives in the utmost ends of the earth beyond Samaria? Well, the Gentiles do. The people they're not allowed to associate with, the people that they are taught are their enemies, the people that they are taught are the ones that God is going to execute vengeance on when Jesus finally sets up his kingdom on earth. I want you to be my witnesses to go to these people as well. Have you ever agreed to something without really understanding what you were agreeing to? Have you ever nodded and gone, yeah, that sounds really cool, and not thought through exactly what you're being asked to do? I actually think we do it in church all the time, especially when we sing. Imagine if we were held to all the promises we made when we sing. This would be the best church on earth. It really would. It really would. It would be the best church on earth, because you guys, even this morning, were sacrificing everything. Did you know that? You were laying it all down. You were laying it all down. Have you laid it all down? We've got to be careful, don't we? I love that passage in Ecclesiastes where it says, guard your lips when you go to the house of God. Be careful what you say so you don't offer the sacrifice of fools. And I think what the writer of Ecclesiastes was saying, and let's admit, the writer of Ecclesiastes is in a bad mood most of the time. But it's like we need to think about what we're committing to. We need to think more carefully about what we're saying. I mean, man, if we did 50% of what we sang this morning, watch out, there's revival happening, okay? But the cost, the reality, once it sets in that this is the thing that God is asking of us, this is the thing that Jesus is calling to, that's where we start to struggle. And I'm amazed that none of those guys caught on. Samaria, yeah, ends of the earth, like... Now, again, I want you to understand, this was not Jesus suddenly or sneakily shifting the goalposts. He wasn't changing the game plan. He wasn't saying, like, I know you signed up to this, but I actually want you to do this. Nothing like that was going on at all. He was opening their eyes to what had actually been there all the time, but they had never really seen. That's what was going on there. Man, we've got to take more careful notice of the Bible stories, because it's all there to see if we come humbly enough to see it. I mean, you can read the Bible in one or two ways. One, to allow the Bible to speak to you and challenge you, or secondly, to look at it to simply reaffirm what you already believe. And when you read it in the second way, when you read it in a way that's simply to reaffirm what you already believe, you're going to miss out on so much. We have to come to it and allow ourselves to be challenged by the things that we see. It's not a book just to back up what we already believe. There's some classic examples in there. I mean, who's ever read the book of Ruth or knows the story of the book of Ruth? Yeah? Well, there's an elephant in the room in that story. The fact that Ruth, the heroine of the story, the one who is the faithful one, the one that God is pleased with, and the one who ends up in the genealogy of Jesus, Ruth is a Moabitess, to which you go, so. Well, here's the problem with that. In Deuteronomy 23, it says, no Moabite or any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even to the 10th generation. So, what's a generation? Maybe about 20 years? 200 years from the writing of that would have included where Ruth was. Not allowed to be part of the assembly of the Lord, not to be part of God's people. And yet, who is the hero in this story? Ruth, a Moabitess, who goes on to be in the genealogy of Jesus. That same passage also talks about Deuteronomy 23, because it's all about who's not allowed. Also its opening salvo is about the fact that no eunuchs will ever be allowed to participate in the assembly of the Lord either. No eunuchs are allowed to be a part of God's people. And then you fast forward to Acts chapter 8, and an angel turns up to one of the first deacons in the church, Philip. Obviously, angels worked well as a messaging service in those days. I think we could do with them today. If anyone's with Big Pond, it's probably more reliable than the internet that I've got. But anyway, an angel turns up to Philip and says, I want you to go down to the road that leads down to Gaza. There's someone there I want you to see. He goes down there, and there, sitting in a chariot, is an Ethiopian eunuch. An Ethiopian, a Gentile, and a eunuch. It's a double strike. You cannot be in the people of God times two. And he sidles up against the chariot, and he notices that the eunuch is reading from the scroll of Isaiah. Why is that significant? Well, because it's the one that talks about the suffering servant, Jesus, and it also talks about in Isaiah 56, the fact that God will make a special place amongst his people for eunuchs, right? So Philip gets up there and he says, do you understand what you're reading? And the Ethiopian eunuch says, how can I, unless someone explains it to me? So Philip explains it to him, tells him about Jesus, and then obviously talks to him about baptism, because the eunuch says, look, here's some water right here. Is there anything that can prevent me from being baptized? Now, that is not a logistical question. That is not, do I need to fill in a form? Is there a class that I have to do? Is there, what's the process? That's not the question that's being asked. He's asking, can I, a Gentile eunuch, someone who is sexually different and prohibited from participating in the people of God, can I be baptized into Jesus and into the church? And what does Philip do? He baptizes him. Now, the first Gentile convert, we sometimes think is Cornelius here in chapter 10. It's not. It's the eunuch in Acts chapter 8, where Philip was off freestyling, doing his own thing, but prompted by God to go and do this, to go and do something that at face value conflicted with everything that he believed. And again, it wasn't that what he believed was wrong. It was incomplete. God was always going to open up the way to these people. But see, the problem is, sometimes we don't see that stuff because, as I said, when we're looking at the Bible, when we're reading these stories, we're reading it with these filters on that's only looking to back up what we already believe, not challenge our thinking. And when we see stuff that we don't like, and we see stuff that struggles with the way we see things, we tend to gloss over it rather than allow ourselves to be challenged by it. See, sometimes we don't see what's been there the whole time because we've got these blinders on and we're in a groove. And we're not looking for disruption, which is why when they come for us from time to time, when they will do, we have a choice. What are we going to do about it? So Peter took it on and he started to think about what all that meant. It says in verse 17, while Peter was wondering about the meaning of the vision, the men sent by Cornelius found out where Simon's house was and stopped at the gate. They called out, asking if Simon, who was known as Peter, was staying there. While Peter was still thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, Simon, 3 men are looking for you, so get up and go downstairs. Don't hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them. Twice in that passage it says that Peter was thinking and wondering about the vision that he had had and its meaning. See, when we're confronted by something that doesn't fit with our thinking, it's helpful for us to think about it in these terms, right? Imagine yourself standing in front of 3 doors. Door number 1 you can go through is reject it immediately, right? I don't like it, I disagree with it, I don't want to know anything about it, bang, we're done. Door number 2 is to reject it, right? Door number 2 is just to go, no, I don't want anything to do with that at all, and just defend your current way of thinking. Now, there is a time for us where that is actually an entirely appropriate response. When something comes our way that clearly is contrary to the Spirit of Jesus, it's contrary to clear teaching of Scripture and stuff, we don't have to think too hard about that. We can go, no, look, that's just not right, and we don't have to take that on. But there's a bunch of stuff sometimes that's not that clear, and we actually need to think it through. And that's where door number 3 comes in handy, where we can go with it and see where it leads, and patiently and discerningly see where this goes, which Peter did. And he took door 3, and we're glad that he took door 3 because it opened up the way to the Gentiles and gave a basis for ministering to the Gentiles. I know Philip had already opened up that door, but now one of the leaders in the church had actually gone there, gone to this place, seen these people, seen how God had filled them with the Holy Spirit, and then went on to go, this is the way it is with God now. Now, these changes that get precipitated, they're not academic exercises, right? These are not things just so that we change our thinking and our beliefs so we can have more interesting discussions at Bible study. They have real-world implications on how we view the kingdom of God and how it all works. And I've been through that more than a few times myself. And I can honestly say, far from damaging my faith, far from, making me want to give up or anything like that, I can honestly say that my faith has become deeper and my vision of the kingdom has become bigger and more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. Okay? God has opened up a whole new world. Those 3 years that I spent out at our other ministry at Seven Hills in the Restore were some of the most formative of my life because just about everything that happened there challenged everything I believed in a good way. And it opened up my heart and my mind in all sorts of ways. So let me finish with some practical points and tips here when you're confronted with something that conflicts with the way you see the world and with what you believe. First, accept that change is normal and healthy, right? It's scary when it happens, but it's normal and it's healthy. There is fear in the unknown, and sometimes it's a bit sad. There's a bit of grief in leaving the familiar, and it can feel like a bit of a death at the times, but there is no resurrection without death, right? Sometimes we have to go through that process of dying to come into a completely new thing. The other thing is it can be a messy process. Remember a few weeks ago I talked about the process of order, disorder and reorder that we go through? We start off in our world, which is nice and neatly ordered, and we know how things work and everything. Something happens and our world becomes disordered where it doesn't work like that anymore, but we don't know how it works yet, and we're in this really, really messy space. And then we eventually arrive at another place where we've thought things through and our world is ordered again, but different to the way it was in the first place. We have to go through that second stage. We have to go through a stage where we're not sure about things, where we're not clear about things, where it can be a little bit confusing. We don't want to live here, we don't want to camp here, but we are going to go through that. And it's important that we go through it. I love this quote from Richard Rohr, who says, "We dare not get rid of our pain before we have learned what it has to teach us. Most of religion gives answers too quickly, dismisses pain too easily, and seeks to be distracted, to maintain some ideal order. So we must resist the instant fix and acknowledge ourselves as beginners to be open to true transformation." We have to let the process do its work. The other thing is, when in disorder, draw close, don't pull away. There is a strong temptation when we're rethinking things and we're confused and we're not sure what we feel about things anymore, to isolate ourselves rather than actually draw closer. And this is where the absolute gold of being in community comes in, that we are to do this together. So when you don't know what it is you think anymore, or you're not sure about things, don't worry about your destination. Just choose an environment that's healthy where you can process that stuff, right? Choose an environment where you can be supported and loved and you can have the conversations you need to have. Fourthly, don't disparage where you've been. There is a temptation when we come to this new way of understanding and revelation of things that we look back and think, I can't believe how silly I was that I thought like that. Well, it's just the way it works. We only know what we know, right? We go through all of these stages and it's part of our growth and our development. It doesn't mean we had it wrong. It was perfectly fine for whatever part of our life that was, but that bit's over and now we've moved on. That held us in place for a long time and now we've moved into something else. But more importantly than anything, never forget that God is big enough to handle all our doubts and our questions and our fears, right? He is not shaken when we get a little bit shaky. He is not thrown when we have to question things. He is not thrown when we have to go back and go, I'm not sure what I think or feel about this anymore. I mean, if you want any evidence of that, just read the Psalms. There is some of the most raw, unfiltered wrestling going on in those messages. It's there to see if you want to see it. People are saying some really significant things in there, like, I don't know why I bother anymore. Have you ever felt like that? Like, that's there. I don't know why I bother anymore. I mean, go back to even like Jeremiah, where he says to God, things haven't worked out the way you said they were. I have a strong suspicion that you tricked me. That's pretty heavy. And God didn't go, oh, I can't believe that you would think like that, Jeremiah. Like, seriously. No. God makes room for us. I mean, what about the big one with Thomas? You know, everyone's going, oh, Jesus is risen. We've seen him. In fact, and he goes, I don't believe that. Until I put my fingers through the holes in his hand and touch the hole in his side, I'm not going to believe anything. What does Jesus do? Go for your life. Go for your life. If that's what you need, go for it. So God is big enough to handle all of these things. So next time something interrupts us, something challenges our way of thinking, and let me tell you, there's been a lot of opportunities for that, especially over these last couple of years, and there will continue to be. Just remember that it's normal and it's okay. Don't ignore it. Don't reject it out of hand. Take the opportunity to see where this is going, because as I say, we may miss something that God is trying to teach us and lead us into if we don't. Let's go and take communion.